Testing. Okay, that works. I guess. Are you introducing me, or should I introduce myself? How does that? That's right. I forgot this. Yeah, that's right.
Well, fancy meeting you here,
Oh,
Mike.
hi. How you doing?
How you doing, Mike? Good to see you.
Good evening. Don't you know there's a blizzard out there and you're not supposed to be traveling on a night like this? Thank you so much for coming, and a greeting to all who are watching to us online. Visitors to Holy Spirit Parish, please bear with me if I do a little family business here. I know there's some probably watching who are wondering, what on earth is a church getting into things like homelessness and local city politics? What, don't you know that's none of your business? So I just want to address that possible question, get that out of the way, that we might fully participate in this program this evening. Back in 1975, the United States bishops, Catholic bishops, did their document on the right to decent housing. They wrote, "We begin with the recognition that decent housing is a right." Our Catholic tradition, eloquently expressed by Pope John the 23rd, Pope Paul the 6th, insists that shelter is one of the basic rights of a human person. The Second Vatican Council said with great directness, there must be made available to all people everything necessary for leading a truly human life, such as food, clothing, and shelter. They went so far to say, traditionally, the Catholic parishes have rendered a major service in meeting educational needs of communities. Our huge investment in Catholic schools, they suggest it should now also meet other critical human needs, including the need of a decent home for every family, suggesting that the commitment we have made to education, to medical care, should be matched by a concern for housing. In 2015, the bishops asked us to become communities of salt and light. Just one quote from that magnificent document. We cannot be truly called Catholic unless we hear and heed the call to serve those in need and work for justice and peace. We cannot call ourselves followers of Jesus unless we take up his mission of bringing good news to the poor, liberty to captives, and new sight to the blind. Could go on to read that social justice has to be at the heart of every Catholic parish in this country. So to those who are wondering, we are being Catholic through and through in wanting to address this social, political, economic concern in our community. I will begin with a prayer, but first note that basket over there will help our guest speaker, Michael, in his next documentary project that he's working on after he finishes this one on homelessness. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Father, we know we are the most blessed of people on earth, and we know that you hope much from those you've entrusted with much. Just speak clearly tonight, Father, through Michael and our panel and Stephanie. Just be clear with us. We are anxious to be a part of your good work in this world. We pray as always through Christ our Lord. Amen. I invite forward our moderator this evening, Bob Walensky.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Another welcome to the Holy Spirit Parish, St. Stan's Church. I speak to you on behalf of the Social Justice Committee of this parish. You may know that in the past we have done some listening sessions on other topics such as racism in Stevens Point. And we're here tonight to talk about a pressing social issue, not just in Stevens Point, not just in Wisconsin or the U.S., but all over the place, and that's homelessness and the homeless. The committee thought that this would be a good topic to deal with, and we have some very important resources in this community to help us understand this and educate ourselves about this. To introduce us to the topic, we have Stephanie Ligman, a member of the Social Justice Committee, born and raised in Stevens Point, a graduate of UWSP, with a bachelor's degree in psychology in 2021. She's currently pursuing her master's degree in social work from UWGB, the Wausau cohort. And she'll get that this spring. Is it this spring, Stephanie? Is it next spring? Okay, so it's 24. Yeah, not 23. Extensive experience she has had working with those in crisis throughout her undergraduate years. For example, she worked for the Salvation Army, serving as rental and housing coordinator. I saw you hug Leanne Trzynski, who's on the panel. As you walked in, Leanne's going to be speaking for us as director of the Salvation Army in this town. And she's volunteered at CAP Services. Recently, she's worked alongside CW Solutions in Wausau, serving homeless youth who have aged out of the child welfare system, and she's trying to help them gain a stable housing and wraparound support system. She's going to take a few minutes to introduce her to some of the statistics and some of the data on what does this issue look like in our local area. So Stephanie, welcome, and take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Ligman, and as Bob so kindly alluded, I've had many opportunities, both in service and learning, to interact with the homeless community of central Wisconsin. Prior to my experience, I had many misconceptions about poverty, and I did not recognize it as a notable problem within Stevens Point. Terrence Lester, a well-known author and community activist, perfectly summarizes how easily our misconceptions can form in the following statement. From the comfort of our own homes, it's hard to understand the complexities of something like poverty and homelessness. I would add that from the comfort of our own homes, especially homes that exist within close-knit and intimate cities such as Stevens Point, it is not only challenging to recognize homelessness as the chronic and growing issue that it is, but furthermore, impossible to fathom what living in poverty is truly like. This evening, you will hear many firsthand accounts and personal stories that help to paint a picture of those who struggle within our community. I would like to prelude such valuable accounts with data regarding homelessness in hopes of displaying the large scale to which the problem truly exists. The data I will share with you is sourced from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Wisconsin Balance of State Continuum of Care, and local agencies funded by one or both of these mentioned entities. In an effort to accurately count and further provide assistance to those living in poverty, these government entities long ago established a formal definition of homelessness. The definition is as follows: an individual or family who lacks a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence, meaning residence in either a shelter or a place not meant for human habitation. The established definition excludes those whom you and I would very well consider to be homeless, such as those couch-surfing individuals or families residing in rundown hotels. Now, why might such an exclusive definition have been created? Because the number of people living without basic necessities, such as food, water, and adequate shelter, is so great that the United States had to categorize solely the worst conditions imaginable as homeless. This definition matters because each statistic I will share with you counts only those that meet such criteria. Furthermore, many assistance programs that exist within the United States today serve only those who are by the worst standards homelessness. As you listen to the staggering numbers that follow, I ask you to imagine how much greater they may be if all that were in need were truly considered, including those who are at imminent risk but not immediately homeless by this definition, but those for various reasons may not have sought assistance in the first place. For the last fiscal year, it was reported that 29 of every 10,000 individuals in the United States were homeless. Within Wisconsin specifically, 36 of 10,000 individuals were homeless. And lastly, within Portage County, 26 of every 10,000 individuals were homeless. At first glance, these numbers may seem low, and it is noted that our county numbers are better than both national and state averages. For give or take the 70,000 residents within Portage County, this makes 182 of them homeless. For perspective, a portion of these 182 people may very well be sleeping outdoors amidst the snowdrifts this evening. A small portion of the 182 may find themselves housed at either of our shelters in town. Though much blessing exists in the warmth and bedding provided there, the shared spaces would be considered less than ideal for those not on their last straw. Another portion of the 182 may have been lucky to receive a one-night hotel voucher from another local agency, or found a friend or community member willing to share their couch for the evening. 182 individuals, families, and children is 182 too many to be living without access to the most basic necessities within our community. Beyond the sheer number of those in poverty are the trends that exist amongst their shared characteristics. We see major disparities in demographic, specifically in accordance with race. The large majority of the homeless community identifies Black, African American, or Native Hawaiian or Indian. These populations are 12 times more likely to experience homelessness than those who are white. Overrepresented cultures within the homeless community are next followed by those of Asian and American Indian descent. Also noted is the overrepresentation of severe mental illness and chronic substance abuse among the homeless community. I urge you to avoid the assumption to view these as causes of homelessness, but more realistically as a reaction or response in the face of adversity. Though I have shared many statistics with you over these last few minutes, I would like to challenge us all to remember that each number encompasses many unique individuals, families, and children who face struggle in their daily lives. I'm confident that Mike and our panelists will do well in sharing of valuable stories, helping us in these remembrance. Thank you all for your attendance and participation this evening.
Good job. Thank you very much, Stephanie. A good introduction, enlightening and contextualizing, because we need to put this in a broader context. We're a small city, a small town, and there's a big world out there. But we do have approaching 200 people, and a night like this, maybe more, who are potentially homeless. Okay, we're very fortunate to have another wonderful speaker in this town, and his name is Mike Carter. And you may have seen his photographs in the foyer when you came in, but if you didn't, you can look at them on the way out in back of the treat table. One thing sure about Holy Spirit Parish, these people we bring a lot of good treats whenever we do events like this, so thank you to the treat bringers. Mike Carter, featured speaker tonight, has had a 30-year career in photography and photojournalism in the third largest media market in the U.S., Chicago, working in both print and broadcast news. He photographed news continuously from 1985 to 2010, starting as a full-time freelancer for Pulitzer Lerner. He worked in the diverse ethnic neighborhoods of Chicago, covering visits by Lech Walesa, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Mikhail Gorbachev, and several U.S. presidents. He photographed the KKK rally in Marquette Park in 1988, and the start of the Daley administration in 1989, and the Harold Washington administration as well. In addition, he has published articles in the Chicago Trib, the Sun-Times, the Chicago Magazine, the Reader, the Chicago Trib Magazine, the Daily Law Bulletin, the Chicago Reporter, and other publications. He's very well published. Mike is now living in Stevens Point, and he's working on a documentary project highlighting members of the homeless community in this city. This project began when he experienced homelessness himself, turning his camera toward himself to document his own experience as a homeless person. His goal is to promote awareness and understanding of the challenges and obstacles facing homeless people. So we're very fortunate to have him here this evening to speak about his topic, the homeless community of Stevens Point, through the camera lens and personal experience. So this is Mike Carter.
Good evening. Everybody came out in the snow. That's great. I love snow myself. I had a normal upbringing. I grew up in a family that was very supportive of me. I had two parents. I had, a brother and sister. We were all my brother and sister went to college. I chose not to, but I could have. So I never pictured homelessness for myself. I never could imagine myself in that position. So when I ended up there, I was it kind of confounded me. I was a little surprised to be there, but I thought, well, I'm homeless, I'm on the streets. I have to try and make something good out of this. I have to, I have to take my experience and, perhaps I'm in a unique position, having been a photojournalist and knowing how to document, people's lives and how to tell a story. I thought, well, I should turn the camera on myself and document my own experience of homelessness for the first time. It's something that nobody should go through. I mean, imagine yourself if you went to your house and you couldn't get in and you didn't have your keys anymore, and all of a sudden you're in a different, dimension where you have nowhere to go, you're homeless, and just all of a sudden, and you have to try and figure out what to do, For homeless people, it's a constant struggle. They're very stressed. Their lives are very stressful. Each and every day, they have to reinvent how they're going to survive. I was homeless in Chicago. I have a little bit, about five minutes or so, maybe it's less than 5, of myself, and the footage is not very good. It's like I was first homeless in 2015, and I had a camera that was probably not very good. But it's, when I have to warn you, there may be one F word in here, so be prepared for that. I couldn't edit it out. I couldn't, so it's in there. But it does have to be done.
I ended up in Swedish hospital because I left my medications in Pittsburgh, and I also told them I was homeless, and they called Catholic Charities to come and pick me up, which they did. Rode in a van, Catholic Charities van, brought us here to Pacific Garden Mission, which I've heard bad things about. And I chickened out. They were doing it. I wanted to do a search. They have a metal detector, and I totally chickened out. I am tired, overtired. My eyes hurt, and I haven't gotten much sleep today at all. Still running. Yes, it is still running. I've been pretty much. I just feel that. And there's a lot of homelessness out there, and it's not right. There's so many billionaires in the world.
I tried sleeping on a train in Chicago, which didn't work out too well for me. I couldn't take the noise and the vibration. Also, it's kind of an unsafe place to sleep. So I opted not to do that. But this is all on my very first day of homelessness, ever experiencing anything to do with homelessness. The extent of my contact with homeless people was bringing them food occasionally, because the neighborhood I lived in had a transit hub, which homeless people were always there. So I used to bring food to them if I had extra food.
Sort of like how.
In fact, this is the transit
I'm
center.
like walking with my eyes closed.
So I gravitated
I
toward
seriously
there
don't know
because
how
it's
much more of
what
this
I
I
knew.
can take. It's only been one day, and honestly, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to. If I could kill myself, I would kill myself. If I had a gun, I would shoot myself in the fucking head right now. It's a horrible way. It's horrible for anybody to have to go through this. You can't imagine. Try to imagine yourself doing it.
Okay, I think that's it. Obviously I was kind of shocked and didn't know what to do, and I didn't even know how to get food at the time, and I tried to beg, but I'm not a good beggar. I can't ask people for anything. I have a hard time asking people to do anything, and so that was difficult for me, and I didn't have any luck with that. So luckily I did Evanston, Illinois, which is a northern suburb, very, very upscale suburb, and they're also very, very welcoming to homeless people. I discovered that they had soup kitchens every night of the week by different churches, so I went up to Evanston, so that's where I hung out. But getting to Stevens Point, I ended up in Stevens Point, and I was worried about being homeless here. I had been here. I'm not going to go through the whole story because it's a long, complicated story, and it's probably going to be my next documentary after this one. But I ended up in a kind of an abusive situation with a woman here that I had known in Chicago and decided to move in with here. But the relationship didn't work out. I had to get out of there. I had to, and I did get out of there, and I ended up in a shelter here. And I then left town to go back to Chicago because I thought, I know how to be homeless in Chicago, but I wouldn't have no clue how to be homeless here. And I will tell you that in my 3.5 years, I believe it is, of observing all the homeless people here and talking to them and, establishing friendships with some of them. I do believe it's harder to be here in Stevens Point. It's harder to be homeless here than it is in Chicago. The homeless people here, I don't want to be critical of the government or the police, but they do get pushed around by the police. So there's no place for them. There isn't any place, except during the winter with the warming center, which is a wonderful place. But most of the year, they don't have the warming center. So they have to try to figure out where they're going to sleep each night. And that's not always easy. You know, they get told, well, you have to move, you can't stay here, you know. So they have to try and go somewhere else, and that may work for a while, and then they may, you know, they may have somebody tell them, well, you have to, you can't stay here, you have to go somewhere else. So they keep getting pushed around. Something like that doesn't happen in a big city like Chicago. The police aren't even involved in, the only involvement they have with homeless people is if they do something, you know, illegal, then the police are there. But otherwise, homeless people are, you know, pretty much left alone in a large city. So I do believe it's harder to be homeless here. And I was afraid to be homeless here. I didn't want to ever experience homeless here because I wouldn't have a clue what to do. You know, I'm not a camper, never been a camper. So, you know, going out in the, you know, wooded area and pitching a tent and living in a tent would be difficult for me. So fortunately, I never experienced homelessness here. But, you know, I did continue to go to Franciscans downtown, which is a wonderful place. You know, it's open to everyone. It doesn't just serve homeless people. That's not the purpose of it, but it is a place where it's quite a good place for the homeless people to go, and they do go there. It's across from the library. Libraries all over the country are usually places that will tolerate people who don't have a home. So, you know, it's across from the library. It's a place where, you know, they can get coffee, or there's usually some sort of food there. And they can stay warm or, you know, stay cool. It's a great place. And so I continued, even though, you know, I got housing here in Stevens Point, and I was never homeless, but I continued to go to Franciscans downtown because it filled a need in me. I didn't know anyone in town, so I stayed there and, you know, got to know the people. And I can tell you, homeless people here, I mean, I've heard certain things. I hear things from people, you know, and some people might be afraid of the homeless people. You know, they might not want to go downtown and, you know, go by the library, or sometimes they're in the square in the summer. You know, they might be a little, like, you know, kind of steer away from the homeless people and think they're dangerous or something. I can tell you that, you know, none of the people that I've met I would call dangerous. You know, they're not, you know, you don't have to be afraid of homeless people. You don't have to fear them. You don't have to cross the street to avoid them. They're normal. They may have problems. They're like, I like to think of them as our neighbors with problems. They need help. They need our help. They need us to help them, sometimes to guide them, sometimes to, you know, try to get them to, you know, drug addiction treatment, or, you know, treatment for their alcoholism, or any other problem they might have. You know, other people have mental issues, you know, and they deserve to get treatment for that, you know. And I start this whole thing with the basic premise that no one deserves to be homeless. You know, some people think, well, you know, they screwed up their, you know, they make bad decisions, they make, you know, bad moves in their lives, or, you know, and they're in that position of homelessness because they, you know, they chose it, or they, you know, they deserve to be there. And the basic premise is, no, they don't deserve to be there. They deserve help to try and get out of the situation. I was one of the probably small percentage that my homelessness was purely economic. I didn't have any problems with alcohol, drugs, mental illness. I'm missing something. But those are, a lot of the homeless people have those problems. But they deserve help, and some of them deserve, I think, guidance. Three people out on the street that I met that are in my photos and will be in my documentary when I put that together, really bother me. Their situations really bother me. One is Autumn Sky, that's her name, 2 Ys, was out on the street, 18 years old. She told me it's because of a bad situation domestically. So she had to escape that situation. So she's bright. She claims to be a good student. I believe her. She's very intelligent. She's likable in a way. She can be unlikable, but like many of us. But she's basically a good person. I see good in her. And I felt bad that, why is an 18-year-old out on the street? Really bothered me. And then there's another individual, also David, who was 19. And, why should someone experience homelessness that young? Why should anyone experience homelessness at any time? But particularly that young when, if you think about how many 18-year-olds are ready to face the world completely, are ready to go out totally on their own. Most 18-year-olds still have their parents behind them, supporting them. And Sky comes from a family where she doesn't get that support and encouragement and that guidance. And I think at her age, I see a lot. Personally, I see a lot of positive in her, and David as well. And I think they could, with a little mentoring and direction, they could accomplish something in their lives. Another couple that bothers me out there is Josh and Autumn. If you've ever gone downtown, you might have noticed them. They have everything on their back. They have these huge backpacks, and they carry everything on them. They have storage now, thankfully. Josh is actually now in some sort of treatment. I don't know the specifics, but he's somewhere getting help. And Autumn then goes to relies on the warming center to sleep. But they particularly bothered me because they're like any negative flack that came from perhaps the business community, and then from the business community to the police, and was probably due to the sight of Josh and Autumn. They were sort of to me, the poster children of homelessness, walking around aimlessly with their, all their stuff on their back, looking pretty shabby. But they're still people. They're human beings. I have talked to both of them. They're part of my project. They deserve some help and guidance. But these are the people that sometimes the neediest people, the worst case scenario, as far as homelessness, those are the people that most need our help. Those are the people that need to, what you have to evaluate what they need. It's difficult to know what will make a difference in somebody's life. I think you have to take it kind of, another thing is on an individual basis. I try to, I'll give the example. I mean, I do whatever I can. I have a car, I'm mobile, I'm retired, I have a lot of time. If somebody needs a ride to the Ruth Gilfrey Center, or they need a ride somewhere for a job interview, or maybe they even need to get to work, if it's not too far out of town or, around Stevens Point or Plover or so forth, I'll drive them. I extend myself personally sometimes to people. I tried to help Josh and Autumn get storage because, their stuff was causing problems for them. Nobody wanted to see all this, these two people with all this junk. To most people, it's junk. Nobody wants to see them walking around from place to place, from the square to wherever, with all this, carrying all this junk. Their stuff was working against them. It was a problem in and of itself besides them. So I tried to get them storage. I looked into that. They ended up getting storage on their own without anyone's help. So they, the problem was solved. But, maybe by my suggesting to them that they get storage, it might have gotten the ball rolling, I hope. But whether or not I did anything, I keep trying. You have to try things. You have to keep trying, and eventually people make progress. The homeless people make progress in their journey. Everyone has a path out of it. Everyone's got some way that they can get out of it. But it's finding that path for each individual, because they're all individuals and they all have slightly different problems, And so I think you got to really spend time evaluating an individual and trying to figure out what they need, and then trying to fulfill the needs that will get them a step closer to getting out of homelessness. Some people, are having trouble finding housing. They may be living in their car. They may be on the street. They may be staying with family or friends, but they may have an eviction in their past history, which is going to make it almost impossible. If it's a recent eviction, they're not going to find housing. A landlord's not going to rent to them. So they have something going against them that becomes a barrier to their progress. Homeless people often have many different barriers in front of them, and people think it's easy to be homeless. They're bums. They don't want to work. Hey, they don't have to work. They're just, they're out there just partying and laughing, and which they sometimes do, but we all do. But we do it behind closed doors. We don't do it out in the middle of the street. But we have the luxury of having a home. But people think it's easy to be homeless. It isn't easy. It's very, very stressful. It is a full-time job. You spend a lot of your time figuring out what your next move is going to be and how you're going to survive. So those are just, things that we all need to be aware of. And, if you talk to people, I would urge people, to come into Franciscans, have a cup of coffee, sit down. You don't have to talk to anybody. You can just listen, listen to some of the conversations. You'll find that people are, they're intelligent, they're articulate, they talk about normal things that any of us would talk about. They're not, some sort of strange thing that we need to avoid. So I would urge people to come in, just, kind of observe if they want to, and if they feel adventurous enough, maybe have a conversation, with someone. I think that would enlighten people. What else did I want to say? How much time do I have? I've got 5 minutes? Okay, I can fill 5 minutes, I think. Homelessness is very complicated. It's a complex problem. It's hard to understand. There's no way you can understand it if you haven't gone through it. It's a traumatic experience. Oh, I wanted to address, some people think, they want to be homeless. We tried to help them. This is something I heard. I won't say who said it. We tried to help them. They don't want our help. They like being homeless. Some of them do, but some of them do embrace it as a lifestyle. But my theory on that, and I talked to another person who is homeless about this, and he said that it's just that people get so used to it, and they look at their options, and they find that There are no options for them in their circumstances, so they have to be homeless, so they're going to make the best of it. And they're going to, they're going to just kind of embrace it as a lifestyle and, go with it. It's a survival mechanism. It's something people do. If they have to live with a situation, they tend to kind of embrace it. So it may seem to some people that, some people want to be homeless. They're there by their choice. But there's always some circumstances that led them to that. They didn't, they weren't born homeless, So that's something to consider. There are some other things I wanted to mention, I'm sure. Some of the misperceptions that people have about homeless people. That's one big one. That they're dangerous, that they're, that they're not intelligent. They're not, yes, there are people with problems. There are people with problems, with mental problems and so forth. But it's still not a reason. Whatever situation people are in, whatever might have led them to homelessness, to be in a condition of homelessness, we still have to help them. I think we have to help them. I think we're obligated to help them. Those are people that, when you're down, it's very hard to get up. And, some of the people I know, Jordan in particular, I don't have any pictures of him, but I have some interviews with him that I haven't shown you. But Jordan is looking for a job. I heard just today, and I haven't been able to verify that he has a job. So, that's another misconception. People think homeless people are lazy. They're not doing anything with their lives. They're not looking for jobs. They don't want a job. And it's not true. I know several people from Franciscans that are actively looking for jobs. Sometimes there are, barriers in their way, which makes it even more difficult. Which makes it a greater to see them get a job, and make a step forward. How much time do I have left? Do I have one more minute? Okay. I'm not sure. I probably wrote down somewhere some things, but I think I've covered almost everything. But like I said, it is a complex topic, and there's much more discussion to be had about it, which I hope will start here for this town. Also, one more thing I wanted to say. I think that in Stephen's point, this problem can be maybe not completely solved, but I think a lot of the people that are on the street can be helped out of it. I think that a small community like this, which is very supportive, there's good things here that help homeless people, and there's very generous people here. There's very people who want to do something to change circumstances for other human beings. And I think it can be, I think the problem here in particular can be attacked and progress be made. Okay, thank you very much for coming out. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mike. One of the kinks that we have in this evening's program has to do with the weather. Our first commentator, we're going to have 3 commentators now. We're going to talk about what Mike said and respond based upon their experiences. And one of them is Mark Cordis. And Mark's supposed to be calling me now. Come on, Mark. And I'm going to hold my phone on speaker to this mic, which, thanks to our Holy Spirit tech person, Paul Peterson, this is what we came up with. And there's Mark. Hello, Mark.
Hey, just hold on. Let me.
Modern technology.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
just putting off my sound on my YouTube.
He's been watching on YouTube. Mark, just sit there for 1 second while I introduce you.
All right, sounds good.
He's been watching, so he's up to snuff of what's been going on. So he's on YouTube, and we're here and now he's here with us, at least by voice. Okay. Thanks for bearing with us with that aspect. Our first speaker, again, it's Mark Cordes, Greg Hansel, and Leanne Trzynski. I'll introduce each of them in succession. Mark, as I mentioned, works for employed by the city of Stevens Point. But he's also been a landlord for over 15 years as a licensed real estate broker and project manager for a company called Inc. 500, INC period, a multi-state real estate development company. So Mark comes very much from the private sector, but also the public sector. He developed and manages the Rent Ready, which this parish participates in, for the Rent Ready homelessness rehousing program, which has housed 38 families in Portage County over the last 2.5 years. Rent Ready. He is currently developing and testing an eviction prevention program called Rent Rehab, designed to help keep people in housing. And he is doing this in conjunction with One Big Tent, nonprofit, and Catholic Charities of this diocese, the Cross. And he is currently employed with the city of Stevens Point in the Department of Inspections and Community Development. He's got all kinds of qualifications to talk about this subject, which he has seen firsthand. So I'm going to pair the left hand with the right hand. Mark, take it away.
All right. Thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that. I'm going to take a slightly different approach than I think what the other panelists will probably take relative to homelessness. And I should say that Bob had given us a list of questions to respond to, and I'm going to go through those. Number one was to characterize homelessness. And for me, I don't believe that homelessness is the biggest issue. I think that's a byproduct of a much larger issue within our society. And to quote Desmond Tutu, really homelessness is pulling people out of the river. So from my perspective, I think we need to go further upstream and find out why they're falling in the river in the first place. And, so essentially, what is the root cause of homelessness? For me, and right now, as some of you are aware, we're working on a housing report for the city of Stevens Point, and it's housing insecurity. And housing insecurity is roughly defined as people that spend over 30% of their income on housing. Currently within Stevens Point, 28% of our residents are spending over 30% of their income on housing costs. Nationwide, 110 million people, or 36% of our population, are spending over 30% of their income on housing costs. These just aren't renters. Actually, seniors are a big portion of that as well. So what happens when people spend over 30% of their income on housing? One major financial issue, it can be medical, a car repair, a job loss, and they lose their housing. I can speak for myself personally. I have 9 rentals, and in 3 of those rentals, I have families that are staying there that lost their homes due to major medical events that caused them to go into bankruptcy and lose their primary residences. So any of these issues can push somebody into homelessness. Luckily they had jobs and they were able to rent for me, and this worked out for them. But it is almost always, when you see people go into homelessness, it's some sort of major issue, a lot of times financially related, that causes them to become homeless. So I think Mike Smith had mentioned evictions and things like that. So I don't believe that people when they hear fair housing law, they don't understand how it works in reverse for people with bad records. If you have an eviction, a felony, a credit score under 650, or your income doesn't meet at least 30% of the rental costs, you aren't going to be able to rent in Stevens Point or anywhere in the state of Wisconsin. And a landlord can legally do that because they have to set, they don't have to, but most of them set minimum standards. And if you don't qualify for those, you don't qualify for housing. So quite simply, wages have not kept pace with all the other costs within our society. Obviously, there's mental health and addiction issues, which I'm not even going to touch on because there's other people there that are better qualified to talk about those issues that contribute to homelessness. So, Bob, your second question was a story. And the story, I'm going to relate a couple of stories. Well, actually, one I just want to touch on, because Mike Carter had mentioned Josh and Autumn. And my story is going to be related to the Rent Ready program. The Rent Ready program is a program that was designed to give people a second chance that had those black marks in their backgrounds, evictions, felonies, things like that. When I met Josh and Autumn, they were staying at the Point Motel. And we did get them into housing. They were in housing for almost a year. There was lots of issues. Some were related to mental health issues. Some related, I think, to addiction issues. And they got a second chance. They got a third chance. They got a fourth chance. And ultimately, I went there with the landlord on several occasions. We had tried to set them up with mentors, and the two mentors that they were set up with, they just wouldn't show up to meet with their mentors. And so it was really an unfortunate circumstance, and it does break my heart to see them on the street on a regular basis, as Mike had mentioned. Out of the 38 families we had placed, actually they were our only failure in the Rent Ready program. So, but we do have a great success, and that was Andrew Lehman. He's a young man that had a very significant criminal background, as well as an addiction background. And I believe he has spoken to your parish previously, but there was a nice story on Channel 7 WSAW about his life and how he turned it around. And he really credits that to the Rent Ready program, because he couldn't find a place to live. He was trying to get custody of his two children back, and Adult or Child Protective Services wouldn't give him custody of the children until he had a place to live. So he went through the Rent Ready program. And he did, again, had a very significant criminal background. We were actually waiting to see if he was going to go to jail prior to getting him into housing. He did get into housing. He did get custody of his children back. Brian Formella, who's in your congregation, I believe sitting in the audience right now, was his mentor. And, this young man has really turned his life around. He has become a foster parent. He's looking at adopting one child that was from a previous girlfriend who's still struggling with addiction. The young man, I don't believe he's even turned 30 years old. He's started his own company, employs 5 people now. And, he credits the Rent Ready program. He credits Brian for just being there. I don't know, I think Brian probably feels he didn't do that much, but in situations like this, a lot of times it's just a positive influence in their life. Many people in these situations have negative influences, whether it's family, friends, or spouses, and it's really a lifestyle. They don't necessarily know any different. Bob Guam, the former director of the Salvation Army, told a story that always sticks with me. He was at the shelter one night, and a gentleman who had been there many, many times over the years came and said, "Bob, come here, I want you to see something." And his son was there, and his grandson was there. There was 3 generations of the family in the shelter at one night. And rather than see that as a problem, he was somewhat proud of that. So it's kind of moving beyond those lifestyle changes and ultimately having somebody as a positive influence in their life. So lastly, you'd ask for ideas about things we can do locally relative to homelessness. And again, I'm not answering necessarily the question on homelessness, although I will get there. I believe that we need to have a minimum standard of living wage in this state and in this country, and I believe very strongly over that. Really, wages have not kept pace with everything else, and housing is just one of those things that hasn't kept pace with. Local communities can't change minimum wage, but state and federal government can. I look at this as an economic equity or economic justice issue. And I know people have walked down the sidewalks on Division Street with signs for their issue of that particular day, but I would love to see people walking down Division Street with signs supporting an equal living wage for everyone. More of an economic justice type issue, because that affects over 110 million people in this country. And I really think that's something that we can all do. So you had mentioned just briefly a new program I'm working on It's called Rent Rehabs and Eviction Prevention Program. I believe in Occam's razor. It's the simplest solution is usually the best solution. And so with this eviction prevention program, it actually starts with the landlord. And then the tenant, when they get served a 5-day notice, which is the precursor to an eviction, they have to schedule an appointment with One Big Tent. And the people at One Big Tent help them develop a plan to get back on track. And Catholic Charities matches part of their rent, because usually they're behind on rent. So they're matching 50% of the rent, but there is a performance criteria for the tenant. So that's something you can volunteer to do. You can help out at One Big Tent, which I believe Holy Spirit is part of. And the other thing I'm looking for, Judicare, which is a free legal service to low-income residents, is actually very interested in this program, and they are interested in training mediators to try to prevent evictions. And they will be offering, the state of Wisconsin is actually funding a 40-hour training for mediators that are interested or people that are interested in participating in this. Now, some of this can be voluntary mediation, some of it may be court-ordered mediation. Training starting in late April, 2 nights a week for, I believe, 4 or 5 weeks. And if you're interested in that, reach out to anybody, Brian Formella or Father Steve or whoever, and they can get you my contact information if you're interested in being trained as a mediator. Again, it's a 40-hour training that's required. One thing on a local political level, the definition of family, I don't know how many people are aware of that, but in the city of Stevens Point, we define a family as either blood or marriage related. Otherwise, only 2 unrelated people can live together. This has created a artificial shortage within Stevens Point because we have empty bedrooms that can't be inhabited because of this fairly archaic regulation. This will be coming to council over the next month or 2. I would encourage every single one of you to show up at Planning Commission as well as City Council meetings to speak to how this affects the least of the people, the least of these among us within the city of Stevens Point. And the last, let's see here. One of the last things I'll say is I've had a mantra that I've kind of developed over time as I've been working with people within the homelessness realm, and that's prayer without action is merely a wish. Because I hear so many people say, well, I'll pray for you. Well, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But we really need actions, and that doesn't mean meetings. It doesn't mean awareness. It means getting up and actually doing something. The Life Report for the last 15 years has identified housing as an issue, and every single year, every 5 years when that report's redone, it gets worse. So it has to move beyond awareness and has to move to action. And these are a few things we can do in our local community right in Stevens Point to keep people in housing, which I think is the easiest solution. Again, striving towards hopefully raising living wages for people, not only in the state, but throughout the country. And that's all I have, unless there's some other questions or comments for me.
Well, we're going to save questions for later. We're going to invite our other 2 commentators to now speak, Mark. So I gather now you have to go back online and then call me again for the Q&A.
Sounds good.
Does that sound good?
All right.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mark.
See ya.
Here's the applause. Applause signs out. Thanks again. Hope I have enough battery. I think I do. So I don't know if Greg and Leanne want to sit up front because of the Q&A later on, or do you want to just feel comfortable there? Yeah, okay, then you can go there after you speak. Very good. The next speaker we have this evening is Greg Hansel. Greg is a Stevens Point resident for over 4 decades. He has a long history of participation on social justice issues in this city and abroad. He spent 43 years in Catholic education, including teaching and administration in Stevens Point. He has worked in a reverse mission center in Mexico and started an overground railroad chapter locally for Central American refugees trying to get into Canada. This was back in the 80s, I believe. He served as a witness for peace delegate in San Salvador. He started Project Self and Awareness, which connected black children from rural Mississippi with families in Wisconsin. He is currently working on projects with Afghan and other refugees, including housing in Stevens Point. So here is Greg Hansel.
The problem I'm working with these issues is that you work with the same people. So Mark Cordes, if you're listening, you stole some of the things I was going to say, but that's fine. Mark talked about the minimum wage, and this is interesting. When the minimum wage was raised last in the late 70s, if we had just raised it according to inflation, the minimum wage now would be close to $23 an hour. That would be livable, but as we all know, it's not. Just a little bit about how I got involved with this and what I'm involved with now. About 46 years ago, I was given a birthday gift from my brother. And it was a book called Rich Christians in the Age of Hunger. And it was a life-changing book. And it basically was a Lutheran pastor who went through and just used scripture and said, he kind of convicted us. This is our job, as Father Steve was talking about earlier. Bob mentioned that I did reverse mission work. And that was in Mexico and Nicaragua. We brought church groups down from the United States, and we give them an experience of poverty. Then we teach them about who caused the problem, whether it was governments or business, wherever it was. And then we train them to go back to their communities and work for social change. And the thing that I most remember about poverty and homelessness there was the stink, was the smell. Dogs everywhere, and it was awful. Here in Stevens Point, though, I volunteer at the Homeless Center, a warming center I have since its inception, probably 7 years ago or so. So a lot of the people, Mike, that you mentioned, I know too as well. And in terms of a story, just a few weeks ago, we had 20 people at the warming center. And there's 3 situations that were really sad for me. One was a young man who came in, didn't talk to anybody. He got his cot. He took his sleeping bag, he pulled it over his head, and he went to sleep. He was terrified. Another is a woman who has been there several times. She's in her 70s. She walks with a cane. She doesn't talk to anybody. She comes in, she smiles, has a little bit something to eat, and then goes to her bed. The third person is someone who was there the first year in the warming center and has been there ever since and can't get out. So there's all different types of people that are homeless and in that situation. Mark talked about how the problem is related to housing, and I'm going to tell you that it's way worse than we think. The Boys and Girls Club now has a person to work with homeless youth. Stevens Point Public School for several years has had a person to work with homeless families. And we have lots and lots of people that don't fit the definition that Stephanie talked about, that maybe live in somebody else's couch or move from place to place because they can't find a place of their own. And they can't rent, as Mark said, because they have a bad record or they've been evicted. For many years, what I did, I thought was really good. And then I realized I was doing a lot of charity work. Okay? It was nice. I was helping people. We set up food. Crawford County, Prairie du Chien, where we lived in, one of the poorest counties, they had no food pantry, so we set up a food pantry. That was nice, but it didn't change things. So now, I'm focused more, I think, on what we can do to change things to make it permanent. And there's some things that are going on in Stevens Point that I think you should be aware of. Mark talked about this family rule. Okay? Stevens Point has one of the most regressive housing ordinances in the state of Wisconsin. And so I encourage all of you to come to that planning commission meeting. Many of us were there the last time and it got tabled back. Something is going to happen. It has to change. That would make a huge difference. There's a couple other things that are going on in the community now too. Wausau just opened up recently a beautiful center. Kevin Noel and the Greenheck people got together, and they opened up a center where there's a 36-bed warming center for people run by Catholic Charities. They have wraparound care there so they can be there all day. And they brought in probably, and John or Father Steve, you might know this more than me, 8 other agencies, was it? Or 9 other agencies to work there, so they have all those services right there. So someone can come and get a place to be and stay warm and get a meal, but also get services to move on. We want to duplicate that here in Stevens Point. So there's a group of us that have met. Kevin came down and spoke with us, and we're surveying different agencies right now, and our hope is within the next year, 18 months, we can have something like that in Stevens Point. And as Mike was saying too, I've talked to business people downtown. People are afraid of homeless people. They're pretty harmless, but they're afraid of them. They don't have a place to go during the day. Last night when I was there, 2 of them said to me, "What am I going to do tomorrow when the library is closed? Where do I go?" On my way in tonight, I ran into one of the guys, and he said, "What do I do tonight? They closed the warming center." I said, "No, they didn't. They closed Franciscans maybe." That's what they talked about last night, so you can still go back there. We need to find a place for these people, and there's going to be more and more of them if we don't change our housing laws and what's happening with housing. The second thing we're starting to work on is to start a public land trust here in Stevens Point. What a public land trust, it would become a 501c3, and we would work to begin to purchase properties and eventually make them available for low and middle income people to purchase themselves or rent themselves. CAP Services is interested, Habitat for Humanity, the city of Stevens Point is interested in this, and we have landlords who are interested in this. So we're currently writing a case statement for this, and then we're going to begin to look for grants and people to start to support that, to get maybe older rentals though and turn those over, maybe get apartment complexes and turn those into condos. Because having a property, home ownership is the easiest way to develop wealth in this country, and we take that for granted. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is this. 2 quotes for tonight, 2 of my favorite quotes. One goes like this: God provides, but he doesn't share. That's up to us. Okay? The other one is from Desmond Tutu, and he said that if you're not against a problem, and you're not against oppression, and you're not against injustice, then you're for it. So unless we're working actively against something, then we're kind of on the wrong side. I can say this: after my wife and I came back from Mexico, living there, we couldn't go back. We couldn't change because we had seen it, and we had lived it, and we had smelled it, and we had heard the stories, and then we were changed. And I hope tonight, after hearing all these speakers, you'll feel the same way, that you've heard this, there's lots of ways to get involved, and that you'll take that step, and as Mark said, not just think about it, but do something about it.
Thank you very much, Greg. One of the premises of this listening session and the other listening sessions that we've done here at Holy Spirit, one of the main premises is that you can't fix what you can't see. So James Baldwin, based on James Baldwin's writing, if you can't see it, if you don't know it exists, then how are you going to fix it? So enlightenment, understanding, and that's what you heard from Greg, and that's what you heard from Mark, and I'm sure that we're going to hear the same from our final panelist, who is Leanne Trzynski from the Salvation Army here in Stevens Point. And I found my glasses. Leanne Trzynski is the director of the Salvation Army Hope Center here in Stevens Point. She has been with the Salvation Army for 14 months and the director of this center for the last 8 months. She describes herself as, quote, a passionate do-gooder with over 15 years of experience and dedication in doing what I can to improve our community. She has spearheaded various initiatives in the nonprofit sector, from Chamber of Commerce projects to pregnancy crisis centers, and now a shelter for those experiencing homelessness. She's been motivated by a strong desire in all aspects of her life, both personal and professional, to help others. With her husband, Deacon Jim, she is involved in several outreach programs through their church. They host several different types of retreats. They do marriage preps. They do marriage counseling. And they are involved with youth. As with other speakers tonight, she is very qualified to sit on this panel. So thank you for being here, Leanne.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everybody. It's kind of hard to go third because a lot of them have all said everything that I have to say, but from the shelter aspect, from the Salvation Army aspect, I know of everybody that Mike spoke about. They've been to our shelter multiple times. I know a lot of who Gary is talking about also because they've been visitors of ours at the shelter also. So our big aspect is to be there, help them in their time of need in any way we can, but we don't do it for them. At the shelter, we don't do it for them. We connect them with any resource that we have in the community. We will walk alongside them, but having them do it themselves to help turn things around really raises their confidence, makes them feel part of the society, makes them feel part of our community. And that's a big thing that we try to instill within the people that we work with. Success stories or interesting stories, we get all walks of life. We get people who just walk up to our door. We get people who've been evicted. We have families. We have people who come to us fresh out of jail and don't know where to go. Last December, we had a gentleman that came straight to us right out of jail and goes, I don't know where to go because I'm not from Wisconsin. I came here as a visit, broke the law, and now here I am. So honesty was phenomenal with us. So we sent him off to the Rent Ready program and said, okay, you got a criminal conviction, let's address that. So he urgently went down there. We work with our job services, so we send him down to Remedy, and Remedy got him placed in a job. 90 days later with us, he had his first apartment in Wisconsin. He was hired as a permanent full-time employee at Warzella's, and he has visitation back with his son. And he is an active member of our community, and he's giving back through volunteering with us. So it's possible. But we have to meet them when they're ready for it. That's what we do. We focus on, are they ready? What do they need? If they're not ready and they're not capable of making the change, what do you need right now? Let's do it. So I do know of a gentleman that's been through our program several times, and he is still homeless. He's out on the streets, and he holds a full-time job. He pays his membership to the Y so he can exercise, shower. He pays for all his bills. We've put him into our housing program, and it caused him too much stress, anxiety, and depression to be in an apartment. Because as he grew up with his father, who was also experiencing homelessness. That's how he knows to live, and he does a great job doing it. Friendly, he walks around with his backpack, doesn't disturb anybody. So my point of sharing that with you is don't judge these people. We don't know their story. We don't know why they're struggling the way they're struggling. And are they struggling? It's not my place to tell him that he's doing it wrong. It's my place to help him when he needs the help. How can we make it easier and better for these people? I have people who drop off their 18-year-old children on my doorstep. I have 20, 30-year-old people that drop off their parents on my doorstep. We have all walks of life. They can't afford housing. They may not have evictions. They may not have criminal records. They might be living on SSI, SSDI, and it's not enough to pay rent. Some of them are capable of part-time jobs, some of them are not. But then if they are on SSI or SSDI, Social Security or Social Security Disability, they're very limited to what they can work and how much they can work because it will impact those incomes. So even to encourage these people to go out and get a part-time job, it's still not enough for them to survive. What would work for the Salvation Army? I give them a 90-day program. We get them on their feet. I have my 7th person in the last month and a half moving out this week into her own apartment. But she's working 2 jobs to do it. We need transitional housing. We need, yes, better wages, 100%. But for me, I need transitional housing. We go from 90 days for them to come from homelessness to having an apartment. It's next to impossible. Housing is very, very challenging in this community. So if I could have my dream, besides a larger facility to help more people, because I'm very restricted to the number of people I can have and the number of family members I can have in a room, it's that transitional housing. Can I have a 6-bedroom house where when they're succeeding with us, I can put them in there, give them a partial rent, continue the training, continue the education, continue the mentorship as they build up their income, as they build up their resume, as they build up their credit, and then they can get into their own apartments. That's what I see our greatest need is from our side of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leanne. Thank you very much. By the way, the minimum wage in Wisconsin is $7.25, and it's been that way for over a decade, set by Washington. States can pass laws to go above that, not below that. I think that was it Vermont, or was it Connecticut, just passed a law to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour by, in 2 years, 2 years hence. States can do that, and some states are at 8, some states are at 9, but we're at the bottom at 7.25, and I dare say that 7.25, and as Greg said, it would be just keeping up with inflation. It would be over $20 an hour, just keeping up with inflation. So anyway, that is one of the problems, as Mark mentioned, and now Leanne mentioned. So we're at that part of the program where we'd like Leanne and Greg to come to the front. We have 2 mics for the listening audience and also for those of us who have hearing problems. I'll come to you. You can speak in the other mic, and Mark is going to call, and this is the one that you push the back for this one. Testing 1, 2, 3. We got it. Yeah, Mike's coming up here too. Mike, please. Yes, please come up, Mike. Mike's going to join in the Q&A. So, first question. Please feel free to ask questions. I'll come back and give this gentleman here, and there's Mark calling in. This is working.
My question is not transportation one of the major problems to have a job and gain stability?
I would agree that is a big issue. We do have the public transportation, but it does not go into Plover, so it will eliminate a lot of potential jobs and housing in that area. I would say there's probably 5 to 10% of the people that come to stay at the shelter do have transportation, though. So it is an issue. I work on it as I do hand out free bus tickets, and I do work with taxi services for vouchers that the Salvation Army ourselves pay for.
I think, though, too, if you want to come up from, like, Plover, to take the Plover cab, it's $6 each way. So one of the refugee women was working out in Plover, and she would get picked up and go out to her job. 7 times over a 6-week period, I got calls saying, Greg, the cab didn't show up. Can you come and take me? So part of it is the reliability, too, if you don't have transportation.
Yeah, the same. I can attest to the fact that the homeless people talk about this too, that those that are looking for jobs may have difficulty. They're limited by, how, if they can't get to a location, they're not going to even look for a job there. So that limits their ability to look for a job. There limits their, the geographic that they can look within. There are vouchers and transportation is given to them at times, so that helps. But if they get a job and they have to be at work every day, that's not going to, that doesn't necessarily help them every day. So yeah, I agree. It's an issue.
Questions? Mark Corda said if you have one specific to him, he would be very happy to answer it. Here's a question back here.
My question is, what mental health services are available to homeless or just even very low income people in the Stevens Point area?
Thank you.
CAP Service has a great program. They have people specifically called for mental health navigation that we refer people to. And what that little cluster, I'm going to say it's probably 3 to 4 people, all they do is they contact all the mental health providers, counselors, interns on a weekly basis to see who's open and accepting patients, and then they know who's available. So everybody that I can contest from the Salvation Army aspect, that we refer to them within the first week of them making contact, they are meeting with a counselor for services.
I think another issue, though, is psychiatrists. So if you need to be prescribed medication if you're homeless, the wait, I know one case, it was a 7-month wait. And that's in Wausau, Marshfield, Rapids, Point, and the Fox Valley, because there just aren't enough of them. So that's a real concern, is how do you, if you have to be on your meds, and if you're homeless or low income, that's a big struggle.
And Mike, did you want to comment on the meds? Mental health?
Yeah, it just brings the question to me: are there psychiatric nurses here that can prescribe? Does anyone know that?
Well, a nurse practitioner can, and La Clinica is opening a mental health clinic here. It was in Watoma too, and that's wonderful. I've heard lots of good things from that. So they're doing that too, a nurse practitioner's going to, but there's just a real shortage of those too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the only other thing I could say is, in my perfect world, I guess there would be a little more outreach to people, so that you meet them where they're at and kind of try and help their problems. But I realize that might be a fantasy to be able to do that.
One thing, the Wausau Center that I told you about, they have a free clinic as part of that center, sponsored by, is it the First Presbyterian Church, Father? Yeah. And so a lot of it is online, but they have that to provide services for the homeless there.
Please. We'll stop right here because I'm near this fellow.
Oh, sorry. I've never really had experience directly with homeless people, but I was a DAV driver for 10 years, and I drove a lot of veterans that were, I would call, most of them were living on the edge. They didn't have their own car. Most veterans, if they do have their own car and they're doing okay, they definitely want to drive themselves to Toma or Madison, and they don't want to depend on somebody else. But a lot of the veterans that I dealt with were living in very substandard housing. We have 2 hours to talk down and back, so I've got hundreds of stories, and they all have about the same theme, is that they get enough each month from their veterans benefits. Some of these people were disabled in war, and they get a lifetime benefit. And they get enough to pay their rent and enough to eat. And that's about it. So they say, I'd love to get a car but the only one I can afford is an old car. And when an old car breaks down these days, you go to Scaffidi's or any other place, the bill is going to be $300-400 for almost anything. So sometimes they get a car. It works for a while because I come into their driveway and I said, "Oh, you got a car?" Because usually we're picking up people without a car. Yeah, he says, it worked for a while there, but then they want $300 to fix my brakes or whatever, so that's why I'm calling you today. I go, well, that's interesting, because people, and then I wonder, the homeless people are almost a notch below because they don't have that guaranteed monthly income, even though it's not a whole lot. It's enough to keep a lot of veterans going. But if they didn't have that, you know, I can't imagine how, you know, where do you start where you can have an apartment and a job and a vehicle? Those three things together will spiral out of poverty, I think. So it's not more like a question, it's just kind of an observation.
Well, the question is, any stories or comments about veterans and homelessness?
I currently have 2 residents in our facility that are veterans, and we do work closely with Veterans Affairs to try to turn things around for them. Work with CAP services on the mental health, because a lot of them struggle with some PTSD. And but yeah, we try to find a way. We do have some veterans or anybody that in our community that calls when they do hit that one catastrophic thing or item like Stephanie had mentioned, where they're living paycheck to paycheck and then their car breaks down or they have a medical situation. They do reach out, and we do everything we can to even do a one-time payment, and we'll take care of that bill for them. We do have grants that allow us to do that.
Mr. Hansel, you said maybe the most important thing we could do right now is go to the city council meeting that's going to decide about the number of people who can live in a single house, that our present zoning law says that only 2 unrelated adults. The proposal was made that maybe 3 unrelated adults or 4 unrelated adults could live in one apartment. That would sort of double our housing immediately without having to put up any buildings. I was at that commission meeting, and I know some other people here were as well. It was a 3-hour, hotly debated matter, and it was just so educational to hear the many implications of that. And Ray would like to speak to that maybe tonight.
Greg, hold on. We have folks at home who need to hear your voice.
Yeah, my name is Ray Cal. I'm going to have a bit of a different opinion regarding changing our zoning ordinances. And the first thing you have to understand is, why does Stevens Point have this ordinance restricting how many people can live in the home? And at one point, historically, Stevens Point opened up ordinances to allow for boarding homes. They did not have any restrictions. And what we started to experience were neighborhoods, particularly around UWSP, as UWSP was going through a major expansion in the number of its students in the 60s and 70s. And you basically created a bonanza for absentee landlords who came in, bought what had been single-family homes, and their economic model was to jam as many students into that home as they possibly could to maximize their rent. Their economic model was to create as much cash flow as possible so that they could save up enough money to buy their next home and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And the experience that Stevens Point neighborhoods, particularly in the inner core of the city, had was that you started having very run-down, poorly maintained homes, and the neighborhood started going downhill. It was that led to this ordinance that you and Mark have referred to as archaic, that I will stand and defend and demand to uphold, with one exception. If you have an owner-occupied home, if you're going to live in your own home and you want to have additional people living with you who are unrelated, and the city wants to, for owner-occupied homes, let more than 2 unrelated people live in that home, I'm all for that. Because I believe an owner owning their own home, renting out rooms in that home to other people is going to be more likely to maintain that home, as opposed to the absentee landlords who just want to get enough cash flow going to get their next property. I have niece and nephew who've gone to UWSP. I've experienced substandard housing through them. You put blankets up on your windows in order to try keeping the cold out. You have garages that were converted to bedrooms and the landlord didn't put any insulation in when he did it because he wasn't going to pay the utility bill. Why was he going to spend money on insulation? That's the situation that we have. And as a person who's chosen to live in Stevens Point, I will oppose any change to that ordinance unless it's restricted to owner-occupied homes only. Because I want to see my neighborhood maintain what it's got, and my neighborhood on the north side has been slowly, over the years I've lived there, slowly been improving a bit, and this changing this ordinance would reverse that, I believe.
Good, well-made point.
Mark may want to respond to that. I don't know, is he on?
Mark, did you want to say anything about that? You're on, Mark.
Just 1 second here. All right, so yeah, from a basic economic standpoint, this basic Econ 101, supply and demand. And right now with 2 unrelated, you're essentially artificially creating a shortage of housing. This is basic numbers. And you have empty bedrooms and they're not being utilized. So we talk about density, and we're not utilizing the density we already have within existing dwellings. So, we just look at the basic economics and of that. Within our neighboring communities, Madison, actually on Monday, is going to their city council. They're going from 2 to 5. Minneapolis just last year went from 2 to 6 people. Our neighboring states of Iowa passed their state statute that eliminated any community from defining what family was. Michigan, their state Supreme Court shot it down, saying it was unconstitutional, it discriminated against people. So when we hear people speak of this, really, I guess I would pay attention. Are they speaking from a me perspective? Are they speaking from a we perspective? The me perspective is going to foster fear. It's going to talk about speculation, and they're not really going to provide any data. You can call these communities in Michigan or Iowa and find out what happened. You can talk to them. They're college communities there. But all the people that are speaking against this haven't called any of these communities to find out what's happened, because it's easier to spread fear. The opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. Fear is a big motivator, and that's what that's what's going to be pitched. So the we perspective is inclusivity, and from I'll say a Christian standpoint, it's including the least of these, the people that everybody else is not looking out for. To quote Gandhi, a community will be judged on how it treats the members that are the least of these within a community. So, keep that in mind as we move forward. It's certainly not going to be easy. There's certainly going to be much debate, and there's going to be, I think there has to be some meeting in the middle. There has to be, looking at this from an objective standpoint. The sky isn't going to fall. We have 2 neighboring states that recently have changed, either willingly or through state statute, have changed things to eliminate the definition of family completely. So, it can happen. The earth isn't going to, or the sky isn't going to fall. But, pay attention to those things as you're listening to the arguments that people make on both sides of the issue. That's all I have.
Very good. I think we've had a good look at both sides of that debate. I think we can see positive and negative in both sides of that debate. But I'd like to move on to other questions. Yes, sir.
Is this working? Okay. All the speakers tonight are very knowledgeable and experienced and have brought up a lot of ways that people could help, or where the where the help is needed. I think it would be very helpful to promote this, to move it on down the road, is to write all these opportunities out, flesh it out. An old fart like me is not going to remember anything after an hour, but the opportunities are out there. I can see that. So that's be a great way to take advantage of this and promote it. Thank you.
That might be a wonderful wrap-up comment, but I think we do have a couple more questions. And here's one right over here.
My question is, sometimes I hear some of the business owners say, if we raise the minimum wage, well, that ain't going to do any good. For one, it's going to knock some business right out of business. They can't afford to pay the workers, so it's better off they got a job than none at all if those little businesses close. And the other one says that, oh, it ain't going to matter anyway because you raise the minimum wage, the product price goes up, and the guy's in the same spot. I mean, so we got $1 wage, but now the food costs $1 more because all the products went up. So, there must be some middle ground. But anyway, anybody have opinions on that?
Any of the panelists want to reply to the minimum wage issue?
I'll stand up this time. Okay, there are a lot of big problems, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that, are somewhat in our control, but I think the smaller problems are sometimes problems we can attack and solve. As far as wages and so forth, I mean, I don't know, that's a political issue, and I guess you just have to vote for people who have the ideas that you agree with and hope that, that's enough. Or, you can write letters to people of the government and express your feelings, let your legislators and, congressmen and everything, know how you feel about things. Economically, I mean, I don't know if anything's going to change right away. I don't know if anything's ever going to change. It seems like I'm going to be a pessimist on this and say that the world's not going in the right direction. Things are going to get worse, and I think we need to be prepared for the worst and for it getting worse. And I don't know. I think if we try, everything's local. All politics is local, right? That's our saying I've always heard. So there are things that can be done here locally to probably help. And I think if people are focused locally, that's a good place to start with anything. That's all I would say.
Don, in terms of the wages, places that have raised their wages in other cities, the product hasn't gone up that much. And I suppose the profit of the owner maybe has gone down. I don't know. I think our system is really kind of skewy, where we say, isn't it great that, and I'll use Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos as example, have hundreds of billions of dollars, whatever they have, I don't know. But we have. Here's a good one. When I moved to Stevens Point 39 years ago, the free and reduced poverty rate in the public school was 13%. Today it's close to 40%. 40% now. It's like 38%. That ain't right. Okay, so we had some changes to make there.
You're saying that, tell us again the 38%.
So when I came to town, the free and reduced poverty rate, kids who come to school who get a free lunch or get a reduced rate at lunch, it's a federal program, was 13%. That was back in 1983, okay? Today, this is probably 2 years ago when I just retired, it was 38%. So it's almost tripled over that time.
Yeah. There is research on this, Don, if I can just comment. The research on raising minimum wage, and there's lots of research on this, shows that in the short run, there is an effect. There is an effect. That is, that the business owner is negatively affected by that, and they typically then have to pass the wage increase on to the consumer. But it especially affects small businesses. The Walmarts of the world hardly even feel it. They get some small short-term effect, and then they also pass it on. And it balances out as a new equilibrium over time. I recall working for $1 an hour minimum wage in the early 60s, and now it's 7 times that, and the sky hasn't fallen. The sky hasn't fallen. The average wage in the rich countries, Western Europe, Australia, Japan, the typically rich countries, the average minimum wage with Australia at the very top at about $20 an hour, and we at the bottom at $7.25, and the average is somewhere around $11, $12 an hour American. And those countries they're not suffering from, serious inflation or serious problems with profits. So there are powerful political interests that want to keep this wage and have kept this minimum wage rock bottom. So there is research on that. Mike, I was going to say, you were optimistic about Stephen's Point dealing with the homelessness problem. Having lived in Chicago and lived here,
yeah,
I think that would you expand on that?
I think in a large city, any large city like Chicago, I go back there every few months to visit, and every time I go back, the homeless problem is greater than it was the last time I was there. So the problem is so big, it's so huge, that I hate to again be a pessimist, but it's almost unsolvable. But I think in a smaller place like this, people might be able to find solutions for things. I think there's a better chance of solving problems in a community like this than there are in larger communities.
Yeah. So the scale of the
scale
issue
is lower, and I think it can be processed more and talked about more, and solutions might be able to be found.
That's very hopeful. Very hopeful. One final question. Over here, the gentleman in the yellow outfit.
Our son just moved to Chicago about 6 weeks ago. He's teaching, and I'll bet you know, the Latin School of Chicago.
Yes. Yeah, very, very prestigious school.
What he's making is better than what he was making in Racine, because he was in another city in Wisconsin that has a pretty deep homeless problem. There's one thing. Last Sunday I got up, or was it Saturday? Our granddaughter wanted donuts. And I got lost just walking in Chicago. And I remember I went into a McDonald's to get some coffee, and this is what bothers me most about what I saw. I think hopelessness is what we're really talking about. Hopelessness at any age, but it bothers me to see, and I'm just generalizing, those 16, 17-year-olds through what I would guess would be 25 to 30-year-olds who are just hopeless, it seems. When I went into McDonald's, there was one young man. He had his head down from the whole time. He looked like he was passed out. And as I left, I nudged him. I slipped him a few bucks. Thank you. And I saw that on almost every street corner. And you would know this better. You were there in Chicago. And being an educator, that's what bothers me the most. That we're trying to help all generations, but that generation is mostly looking at a future that's so bleak. And I truly congratulate all of you who are taking such a role in your own way to try to help this problem. We need to help our young people very much.
Thank you very much. Good. That may be a good comment to end on. However, our mysterious speaker on the phone, Mark, wants to make one more announcement about a comment he made earlier. Are you ready, Mark?
Mark wants to say. I am. I just wanted to remind anyone, if they're interested in becoming a trained mediator. That Judicare will have that training coming up at the end of April. It's in the evening. It's 2 nights a week for, I believe, 5 weeks. So again, get a hold of me if that's something you feel you're called to do and would have the right disposition to mediate settlements between parties. Again, the primary purpose is to prevent evictions and working with Judicare. They may be voluntary mediations or they may be court ordered, in which case it would be reviewed by an attorney before it was signed off. Thanks.
Very good, very good. Any final comments from the panelists? All set? And Stephanie wanted to make one announcement at the very end.
Thank you again for your engaging questions and attending tonight amidst the storm. As Bob mentioned, Holy Spirit knows how to throw an after party. So we invite you all to the gathering space to enjoy light refreshments and snacks afterwards. Alongside the snacks, you will find many copies of the book Evicted. As Mark Cordes touched on, eviction predates homelessness, and this is what the wonderful text focuses on. Encompassed are the true stories of both landlords and tenants living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and their delicate balance of profit versus fair and adequate housing. We saw tonight how interesting and different these point of views can be in talking about city ordinance alone. There will be an engaging book club each Monday in March, starting on March 6th, with sessions beginning at 6:30 p.m. I know it will be incredibly engaging, as I am leading it. I'm just kidding. Please consider grabbing a copy and signing up either on the sheet provided or online. Thank you.
It's a very good book, Evicted. It did win the Pulitzer Prize. And it's about homelessness, well, eviction really, mainly in Milwaukee. It's a very deep dive into the homeless, mainly the housing situation in Milwaukee. So if you want, you buy a book out there, and Stephanie's gonna lead us on that one. So thank you all for coming. I hope you have learned. I hope you've enjoyed the evening. Please join us, as Stephanie said, out in the foyer for those goodies and a cup of coffee. Thanks again to the panelists. Have a good night.